we have one more treat for you tonight. I think you all know who I'm talking about. He's not only a storyteller, he's a performer. He's a beautiful, beautiful man. He's honest, he's loving. He is so bold and just courageous in his storytelling. And it's an honor for me to welcome Ralph Fredericks to the stage.
So lean in, darlings, for an old man's tale. Somewhere in Middle-earth, or so I've been told, there's a crystal cave that's guarded by dragons, and it protects the sacred symbols of eternal truth. The Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, Excalibur, and a large slab of lavender marble upon which these words are etched. There is nothing more tedious than some old queen talking about his mother. But that depends on the mother, and it definitely depends on the queen. My mother was born Wanda Dolores Smith in the coal mines of Westbrook, Virginia during the Depression. And she had an older sister, and it was a starving time. And they would get together after seeing a Shirley Temple movie and talk about what they dreamed for. And it was always with two things: security and security. How my aunt found it is when she was 15 years old, she dyed her hair platinum blonde and changed her name to Rita. And she ran away with the carnival as a hoochie coochie girl, and ultimately ended up as one of the top call girls in Miami, Florida during the war. Now that was when being a call girl meant something. My mother went the other way, and she held on to her virginity and went to secretarial school and waited for the man of her dreams. My mother was beautiful, but then aren't they always in stories like this? She was full of bosom and slim of waist and very, very seductive. And my father had just come out of the Navy, and he had a medal, and he believed in the American dream. My mother was hot, he was horny, and it was made in heaven. He believed in the American dream, so as soon as he could, they moved to the suburbs and had 3 children in succession. I was number 3. Now, my 2 older brothers, thank God, liked to throw things. I don't like to throw things, except the occasional hissy fit. But my brothers liked to throw things, and so they kept my father happy when they would play catch in the yard, which left me to sit inside and watch soap operas with my mother. And Sissy and his mother, it goes back as long as the day that Abel told Eve at a fig leaf, mother? Really? Now, it was a good thing that we were so chummy, because when we moved into a little better neighborhood when I was about 10, the women hated my mom. She was too loud, and she was too brash, and they hated her boobs. Especially on the day she put on a little black bikini and take out a pink transistor radio and sunbathe in the yard, which was always the day that those husbands would choose to mow their lawns. They also hated the way she parented. When Mrs. Feigley next door sent Rhonda off to school on her birthday with a tray of pink cupcakes in honor of Barbie, my mother would not be outdone. So on my birthday, which happened to coincide with the birth of George Washington, she fashioned a cookie cutter into the shape of a hatchet and cut them out because, you know, he had chopped down a cherry tree. And besides putting on the sprinkles, she very carefully, with food coloring, painted red along the blades. So I went to school very proud of the founding father, and all the other mothers saw Lizzie Borden. Mrs. Manny was so proud of little David's perfect attendance in school. She'd send that kid to school with pneumonia in a monsoon to get that plaque at the end of every year. But my mother had a whole different idea about the breadth of education. She thought it made perfect sense to keep me home and fill out an admission slip so that I could sit with her and watch the midday movie and eat popcorn. You know, she'd say, arithmetic is great, but so is Auntie Mame. When the other women wanted to air out their children, they would take them to the local playgrounds and give them a popsicle. Not Wanda. Wanda would take my hand and we'd walk along the railroad tracks that were behind the neighborhood where we lived. And on the way, she'd hum, and we'd pick blackberries that had been warmed in the summer sun. And then we got to our destination, which was this ancient cemetery at the end of the tracks. And she'd lay out a blanket and spend the day. We'd share a sandwich, and we'd eat the berries. And she'd tell me stories that she invented about the lives, the intertwined lives of all the people whose names are on the gravestones. The only time I was frightened was once when a big hearse came out and they were pulling out a coffin, and she said, "Oh, Ralph, don't be afraid. Just go wake up our friends and tell them they've got a new neighbor." When she was good, she was very, very good. And when she was bad, she was magic. Everything changed for us when, in the February of my 11th year, I got scarlet fever. A scarlet fever was really rampant during those times, and it was terrifying because it was very contagious, and antibiotics were new. So my mother had my father take my siblings to go stay with their mother, and she took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, we may have to take him to the hospital because he could go blind or he could go deaf, and if we don't crack this fever, he could die. And my mother said, "Die? If you say he could die, you would let him die. My child will not die." And so she took me home. And for 3 days and nights, she didn't leave my side. She bathed my brow and sang to me. And then when my fever wouldn't break, she took buckets of snow and put them in the tub and put me in. And she ignored my screams to try to bring my fever down. And I said, "Please, no more tub, Mommy, no more tub." And she did it anyway. When I couldn't stand it any longer, she took me out and she dried me off and she wrapped me in her bathrobe and put me into her bed. And through my fever, she began to whisper tales again. And she went up into her closet and she pulled out a candy box that was covered with violets that I'd never seen before. It was hidden in the back. And she said, "Honey, these are my keepsakes." There were photographs taken with an old Bradley camera and her 8th grade diploma. She was so proud of that. There was a dried carnation and a handkerchief where she knotted all of our baby teeth into the corners. And then she reached underneath and she brought out this square, and it was a matchbook with a photograph on it, and she was in the photograph. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "When Mommy was a girl, I took the train down to see your Aunt Beulah, and she lived in a fancy town called Miami. And one night she fixed me up on a date with a boxer named Rocco. And she gave me a dress, and it was Bluebell blue. Now, bluebells from that point on were always in our garden. We had prime rib and we danced. And he heard me singing, And he said, "Would you like to sing, kid?" And she said, "Oh, I'd love to sing." He slipped the band leader a C note. And the band leader said, "So, baby, what do you want to sing?" And she said, "Do you know Prisoner of Love?" He said, "Sure, I know Prisoner of Love." At the end of the date, my mother was overwhelmed with passion in a way she never had been before. But Rocco knew that she was special, and he said to my aunt, "You take care of this girl. She's a good girl." And then a photo girl came by and took their picture and put it on a souvenir matchbook. My mom said, "You know, Rafi, every night before I go to bed, I take a moment and I blow a kiss to the star. And I say, 'Good night, Rocco.'" She put the matchbook back in the box, and I got better. And she said, "Ralphie, you have to promise me you'll never tell your daddy about that." And I said, "I promise, Mom." Well, I got better, and life went back to normal. And she and I were now bound like shipwrecked sailors lashed to a rock in a stormy sea. See, she had saved my life, and I knew her secret, and things would never be the same. She had another child, my sister, and afterwards she was very depressed. And so the doctors gave her diet pills. Now, diet pills when I was growing up were like housewife meth. They gave them to everybody. I mean, why do you think Donnery was always vacuuming that goddamn house? She was flying around the room. Well, my mother's moods began to change, and she got her wired. And then ultimately, they tried to take care of the diet pills with tranquilizers. It was our own little Valley of the Dolls. I grew up and went away to school. And I don't have to tell you what it's like to grow up with an addicted parent, an alcoholic mother. My mother was like all those mothers who have now, all the chicks have left the nest, and she's alone in the little house the little world that she created for herself. Just like in some Lifetime Channel for movies starring Valerie Bertinelli, we got the late night phone calls and the police reports, and ultimately all of her children abandoned her. And besides the pills, she had discovered wine, and my father retired early to protect her. And she sat in a Barcalounger and drank gallons and gallons of something called Inglenut Country Chablis, and looked at pictures of herself when she was young and beautiful and full of hope. My mother became almost an anecdote to me. Did you hear the one about the guy who got his mama a private tour of the White House? He pulled some strings, and she showed up that morning so hungover that she asked to lie down in the rose room. Yuck, yuck. Over the years, my visits became less frequent, but the presents got bigger. And when she died, I went home. I was relieved, as well as much as saddened. And I hadn't been there for a very long time. I had not seen her for the last 3 years of her life. The last time she spoke to me, she said, "Ralph, when are you coming home?" I said, "Mom, I can't, I'm so busy." And she said, "You know, Ralph, you used to have character. Now you are one." Now you are one. So, I landed back in Ohio, and I entered the house where all of my family was, and they were strangers. Before I went to the funeral, I asked my father if I could just have a few minutes in my mother's room. And I walked in, and there was that bed where for 3 days and 3 nights she bathed my brow and said, "Oh, Ralphie, we're different, you and I. We're different." I opened her closet, and there next to her blue double-knit pantsuit that she loved so much were all the dresses that I had sent her over the years, all with their tags still on them, having nothing to do with her, but just a testament to my own advancing taste and income. Costumes I had tried to make this woman wear that had nothing to do with who she was. In the corner of the closet, I saw that box with the violets, and I remembered her keepsakes. And that afternoon, when we were putting her in the ground, I patted my pocket and I smiled, because I had kept my promise, and I had kept her secret. And in my pocket was a matchbook from a nightclub in Miami in 1945. Can you tell me what is the unfed meal that makes a child hungry forever? What's the unembraced embrace that can make a woman hold on to the dream of a love that never existed her whole life? What's the pill in the bottle that makes imagination delusion? What's the drink in the glass that turns high spirits into something called shame? I don't know. But since my mother died, I've asked myself those questions a lot of times, especially when I struggled and fought and danced with my own melancholy. And then one morning, I woke up, and I was knee-crawling, and I looked in the mirror, and there I saw my mother's face, dead-eyed and bloated, and I said, "I am my mother's son." But somehow, in the back of my head, I heard her voice, and she said, "Yes, Ralphie, you are my son, and I am your mother. And life is short and love is hard, but we're different. Save your love. But when you think of me, why not remember the magic? I am me. I am a sum of everyone I've ever loved and anyone who has ever loved me. And when I think of my mother now, I don't think of the woman in the Barcalounger with a glass of wine. I see a beautiful young woman in a dress of bluebell blue, standing in a nightclub in Miami, blowing a kiss to a boxer named Rocco, when on the best night of her life, the band leader said, "Hey, honey, what do you want to sing?" And she said, "Prisoner of Love." And he went, ladies and gentlemen, for one song only, Miss Wanda Dolores. And she caught the light and sang, "My dear, from night to night you'll find me too weak to break the chains that bind me. I need no shackles to remind me that I'm just a prisoner of love. I need no shackles to remind me that I'm just a prisoner. Magic of love."